This is the Stabby Road Podcast.
Welcome to the Stabby Road Podcast. I am Stabby Tech Josh, and above me in the Brady Bunch box above my head is...
Oh, I'm Joe Senna. I'm the old guy. They let me out of the iron lung for a few days.
He's back. He's fully recovered from the various ailments that he had been suffering from the past few weeks. And this is a very different episode we are doing. This is breaking our normal sort of structure, but we thought there's a topic going on being discussed in the horror community that both of us, everybody at Stabby Road, has been contributing in our sort of private group chat, but Joe and I thought that we wanted to bring it to the podcast and have an open discussion because he and I were the two that seemed to have the most differing opinions on the subject matter. But
to your point though, not only we agree more than we disagree if you listen to the episodes, but our generational perspectives I think are really important for this conversation. So the fact that you and I each represent different ends of that timeline spectrum, I think brings a level of importance to the conversation.
Yes. Okay. So the topic today, we want to talk about horror and whether or not it is political. This is stemming from the statements of director Damien Leone that, if you are listening to this podcast, requires no sort of preamble, and you definitely know what we're talking about. But I'll start by reading his tweet, specifically because I want to get his words as they were spoken. I don't want to get anything sort of mixed up. So Damien Leone's statement was as follows. I want to make a very important statement regarding the Terrifier franchise in this ugly political climate we're living in. As most of you know, some of my cast and crew members have a very passionate political presence on social media with extreme and sometimes harsh opinions, which is their right. I'm all for freedom of speech and expression. That being said, Terrifier is not in any way, shape, or form a political franchise. I did not get into filmmaking to become a politician or promote any political agendas or ideologies, especially through a killer clown movie. I fell in love with horror movies as a form of pure entertainment, and those are the films I like to make. Since Terrifier 1, our cast and crew has and still consists of both Republicans and Democrats, and anyone is welcome to be a part of it, regardless of their political affiliations, as long as they're a decent human being. That goes for our fan base as well. If this doesn't sit well with any fans or cast crew members, that is your right, and I respect it. You don't have to buy a ticket, and you don't have to work on these films. Thank you, and I recommend you don't let toxic rhetoric on either side of the political spectrum deter you from being a Terrifier fan. Okay, so before we dive into any of this, it should be noted, and then he did post a more direct attack, that this is directed at lead of the films, David Howard Thornton, friend of the show, David Howard Thornton. I don't necessarily want to get into that specific aspect of it. Many people are already talking about it. We love Dave. We support Dave. But I think and Joe, if anything here sounds incorrect, we want to more talk about the political nature of horror as a whole than this specific statement.
Well, I want to back up, and I want to talk about Damien's follow-up statement, which I have up here on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And his statement was, I'm all for political horror films. There's a difference between making a political film and purposefully weaponizing your non-political film or the platform it's enabled you to have in order to push personal political agendas and alienate people you happily, quote unquote, happily work with. Now, you framed that as an attack.
Yes.
I'm reading it and it's pointed, but having looked at Dave's Facebook page, which is pretty much where all this action happens.
Yes. He's been very active on Threads as well.
He's been very active. Okay, again, I'm not on Threads, but I don't see this as an attack, but him further defining the situation. And I have to say that it's hard. The moment he came out with that first statement, he stepped into the quicksand.
Yes.
And no matter what you do, whether you thrash to your left or you thrash to your right, you're going to keep sinking. And I think that his first statement was well intentioned. The only person who is really vocal that we know of is Dave. And
Uh,
I think what
uh,
he's saying.
Lauren
Mhm.
Rivera is also very politically active, at least in
Oh,
the past.
okay.
I don't know. I haven't followed her up recently, but I know in the past has been very
Uh,
vocal politically.
Understood. But this is very clearly
This is
pointed at
clearly
Dave.
specific at Dave. Yes.
But it's not now. He mentions alienating people you quote unquote happily work with. Now, we don't know if it means Damien or if it means other people. I happen to know because we're also Facebook friends that one of the people responsible for getting the film financed is on the opposite end of the spectrum from Dave.
Mhm.
So we don't know whether or not that relationship has been affected. This was David's um, own statements on his own Facebook page, and because of his fame, what happens necessarily is eventually is the line between you and the character you represent, and therefore the business that character represents gets blurred. Um, so I just wanted to address the two
Yes.
Damien statements, and the second one, not I wouldn't frame it as an attack as much as sort of like a you're elbowing the guy next to you and saying, "All right, see what you did."
Mhm.
Um, Now, I think before we go further into this, I think each of us should kind of set up where we are on this conversation.
Yes.
So uh, I want to say a couple because we're going to go into a debate, and
Yes.
before we go into the debate, we talk about what side we're going to pick, if
Yes.
it's even a side, or if this is going to be more of a conversation. It just so happens we both got different
Well,
life
that's the thing is
experiences.
I like the idea of framing this as a debate, but I'm
Yeah.
very open. I wrote a short but still fairly encompassing summation of my thoughts on all of this.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's
But
right. This was the opening statement you were going to make.
I
No, go
wanna
ahead,
yeah, so
because I'm
okay.
probably going to come back afterwards.
So
So
then let me read
sorry
that
about that, Josh. I didn't
because
mean to
no
bulldoze.
no 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 you're not at all. Let me read that because this I had written this about an hour ago.
Hmm.
So I'll read this, and this seems like a decent starting place for us.
Hmm.
Um, Terrifier is not in any way, shape, or form a political franchise. I fell in love with horror movies as a form of pure entertainment, and those are the films I like to make. That is what I'm going to take of Damien's for what I'm saying right here. I'm now going to present my case in the most succinct way that I can why horror is political. I want to stay focused specifically on horror, but most of what I'm saying can and is applicable to art as a whole. From the beginning of its inception, horror has been political from both an internal and external standpoint. The internal reasons being ones brought to the genre from the creators, the external reasons stemming from issues such as censorship and Morality debates. Externally, we've had to battle censorship from the Hays Code era in the United States or the video nasties in the UK, and any number of censorship movements. Quoting directly from Jeff Rouso's article on this subject, which I will link below. I've got the link saved in here, and we'll put it in the show notes. Politics is not just about party affiliations or left versus right divisions. Politics encompasses societal values, cultural shifts, and the freedoms we fight to protect, such as free speech and artistic expression. The very act of releasing an unrated film in theaters, as Leone did with Terrifier 3, was a political statement against the MPAA's grip on the industry, whether he acknowledges it or not. His film pushed the boundaries of free expression in the same way that past horror films did when they challenged censorship boards. End of quote. And we're now seeing the fruits of that statement with the new Toxic Avenger being released unrated. Um, some ways that horror is political internally come from horror being created by and consumed by queer and POC audiences, and often as a way of being able to present their experiences while remaining comfortably within the boundaries of what is allowed, whether legally by working within censorship laws or socially with audiences that would revolt otherwise. Um, Joe, I know you will argue with me, but I promise you I can back this up. In the 60s, if you had a movie that ended with a black man fighting for freedom only for a gang of vigilantes to kill him, that might not necessarily fly with a white audience. But as the tragic climactic moment in a horror film, you end up with one of the most influential, iconic horror films ever conceived. Bram Stoker's Dracula was written by a closeted gay writer in response to witnessing his close friend Oscar Wilde, who was sentenced to hard labor for sodomy. Think about that in today's context, right? That's unbelievably crazy to think about. And I don't think it's a coincidence that during and just after the AIDS epidemic, there's an uptick in extremely queer coded and in some cases explicitly queer films featuring blood sucking vampires. Every time since its creation, any time that there has been a major war or political or social movement, there's not only been an uptake in the creation, but in the creation of, but also the consumption of horror stories. That also can't be a coincidence. But the very existence of horror proves his statement about making horror movies purely for entertainment to be most charitably ignorant. If everyone within a horror story acted within the boundaries of socially and politically acceptable behavior, then you would not be entertained or scared by these stories. Therefore, the inclusion of characters acting against those social and political norms makes that story inherently an author's statement about those very structures, whether that's their intent or not. And we know that he's not ignorant of the political nature of his work, as the whole team paraded around their unrated status and based all of their marketing and showed that their raison d'etre is to be creating subversive and violent films. Horror is only entertainment when you have socially and politically been given the benefit and the freedom to be able to view such violence and transgression as solely entertainment. And like I said, I will. That is the end of my statement, and I will include a number of articles that sort of informed some of that that I was quoting in some areas. Uh, but
So you said you wrote that an hour ago. What did it take you an hour to write? Jesus Christ, that went on forever.
thank you, Joe.
Um, it the this, just like in Star Wars when that guy on the Imperial Star Destroyer was going to shoot the escape pod, and they told him to hold his fire, but if he actually shot it, it would have ended the film. Um, the Your statement about horror itself being political in and of its own existence, if we start from that basis, there is no argument here.
Well, I
So,
no, no,
but
no. I want to discuss this. I don't want to.
but that's the point. I don't want to start
Yes.
from that platform. That's
Yeah.
that's I don't know if this is going to be audio or video, but I'm Italian. I'm using my hands to make a point. Um, that's starting from down here, and
Yeah.
then go even lower. And there's something else you said in the text, which is art itself is political,
Yes.
and it's and the point, the position I'm going to be taking, and I'm deliberately taking a contrarian position, and I'm doing this specifically as a way to test how watertight the argument that you're making is. I want to say horror is always political. I want to say that no matter whether or not it's a shitty rubber monster movie, made by a couple guys who want to make money on Tubi, um, to the substance, there is something being said by each and every one of those films.
And I would
Uh,
argue, Joe, that if they're making the movie to try to make money on Tubi, that is an act of capitalism, and that is political.
that's okay. That This is where maybe it's generational, but um, capitalism, for better or worse, right now, that's it's the oxygen we're breathing,
Yes, and
and if you've
therefore,
got
that's
to,
what I'm saying. To be able to say I'm creating this because I want to make money to earn a living.
right,
Even
I
if you
don't.
take all creative hands off of it, that is trying to survive under capitalism.
And you know what? There are those of us who are doing just fine under capitalism, and I'm realizing I'm listening to those words coming out of my mouth, and I'm saying, "Oh boy, that's
Very
that's
few
saying
of us.
something." Well, it's I survive. Notice I said survive. No, I said I'm doing pretty well. It depends on your measuring stick, but um, if you're coming at it from a point that uh, what's that line from where Stellan Skarsgård said in Andor? He says, I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat him."
Haven't gotten there yet, but that's a
if
hell of a
making
line.
oh, it's right before he gets killed. It's okay. It's but that's the truth. I used to make a joke when I worked at Universal Studios. I went in there wearing black and having weird glasses and a weird haircut, and then when I left, I had a nice, I looked like a typical, you know, white boy tech bro at the time, suit, tie, and I said, because my goal at working at Universal, because I snuck in because it was the internet age. And back then, I've said this before, if you could spell internet in the 90s, you got a great job. So I believed that if you want to infiltrate the enemy, you have to wear the uniform.
Mm.
So the more I got to understand corporate culture, the more I started to learn how to speak the language and look like them and smell like them and talk like them. Is the act of just making a movie so you can make money, is that in and of itself a political act, or is
I
that
believe so.
okay? I don't believe so, because I think depending on who's doing it, they may not see it as a political act. They may just see it as a function of living. They may not look
But
at
that's
capitalism. I disagree that itself is a political act,
a
I think
political
that.
act is a political act regardless of intent.
Oh, wow, no, that I strongly disagree with. I think at the
Why?
end of the day, because at the end of the day, even when the Romans were persecuting Christians, there was still a guy trying to sell his bread at the market, and he had his head down, had no idea if he was aware. It's one thing. If he was unaware, and back then, plenty of people were unaware. And even so today, people may be aware, but uneducated, or don't have an opinion because there are so many opinions being thrown at them that they're numb to it. I don't believe that everybody, through every action, is making a political statement. And I believe that what you're saying is a function of what's going on today, where everybody feels like everything's political.
But it's not about but you can make a political statement without the intent of making a political statement. Making a movie,
Hmm.
right? Whether like Damien Leone making this transgressive horror film that's unrated.
Hmm. Right.
Let's
Yeah,
assume
so I
it.
see. No, I see your
No,
point.
no.
That
Let's
I'll give
assume
you that.
ignorance.
I'll
We're
give
going
you
to
that.
assume that he's
Yeah.
an idiot because at every shot
Okay.
we can, I'm going to take a shot at this guy. But no, no. We're going to assume that. We're going to assume ignorance that he isn't aware of the history of
Hmm.
horror.
Right.
There is still a lineage of people that took political action and fought
Yes.
for his ability to be able to make that movie. And without the political framework that allows him to make such a movie freely, then he wouldn't be able to. And that, I think, is a political act, right?
Then you would say that, um, because we're able to go down to the store and buy a pack of cigarettes, we
Yes.
have John Adams to thank for
I'm
that.
not saying we necessarily have specifically John Adams, but
But that's
yes,
my point. Who are the people who fought? Who are the people who died?
yes, every
It's
act is a political act.
I this is I think we need to agree to strongly disagree on that, and I'm not sure if either of us is going to change the other one's mind,
But why
because
are
I
you
think
arguing with this?
because I don't believe every act is a political act. I don't
What
believe it.
act
Not
don't you
everything is
believe to be a
everything is
political
a.
act?
I bathe my son when he was a baby at night. Was that a political act?
Yes,
I
there
go
was
to sleep at
political
night.
legislation that
It's
allowed for you to have the water that bathed your
that
child.
that is not in and of itself a political act. It is a result of somebody else's political act. Just because you're allowed to do
So
something, or
washing the
just because,
child, you're right, fine, is maybe not a political act. But
right? So
creating a
so
transgressive film that is unrated, that is a middle finger to the ratings board, that is a
yes,
political
I
act.
am agreeing with that. I am agreeing with that because of the reason you're saying, but not so much because somebody else made the environment available for him to do it. Romero did this in '78, and the reason why they did this with, if this is video, it's right over my shoulder. My favorite horror film of all time, Dawn of the Dead. Right over here on the poster, it says there is no explicit sex in this picture. However, there are scenes of violence which may be considered shocking. No one under 17 will be admitted.
Mhm.
Back then, the only stuff that you couldn't get into if you were under 17 was porn. And I know because I tried. So it was a big deal for them to just say, you know what, if we cut this film, it's going to be garbage. We have to go unrated. Yes, there was a lot of chances taken, and yes, Dawn of the Dead is one hell of a political film, and it's not even trying not to be. Um, so there's precedent for unrated films going out there, and by virtue of being unrated and trying to create reactions from people, um, it is an act of subversion. Is that necessarily political? Maybe we need to define what politics are here.
I think that I did in my. Well, actually, I didn't. Jeff Rousseau uh, defined what I've been using.
Hmm.
He wrote political politics is not just about party affiliations or left versus
Right.
right divisions.
I heard that.
Politics encompasses societal values, cultural shifts, and the freedoms we fight to protect, such as free speech and artistic expression. That, I
And
think, is the
I'm going
definition
to
I would work with.
understood. I am going to disagree with that because
Why?
I believe that what he's describing is culture. And culture is something that's like the oxygen that we breathe. We don't
Well,
choose to breathe it. It happens to be what's around us, and politics may affect it. And maybe it may affect politics, but it does not necessarily mean one is exactly equal to the other. My argument here
I would
is
then
that
also.
horror is about culture. It's not about politics. And that's because I believe the definition of politics and culture are different.
Well, I would then bring up my the last statement in what I wrote, which is that horror is only entertainment when you have socially and politically been given the benefit and the freedom to be able to view such violence and transgression as solely entertainment. And I think that culture and politics do define each other, and they are interlinked in a way you can't separate.
Um, I don't think I would agree with that 100%. I think that if you dropped five guys, five people on a desert island somewhere,
Yes.
um, and they had to figure out what their culture is. Um,
It would be shaped by politics. Who's going to do the farming? Who's going to get the water? Who's going to build the boat to get us off of this island? Who's going to be in charge? Are we all going to make decisions by committee? Are we going to make decisions by electing one unilateral person to be in charge?
I don't think that's politics. I
That
think
is
that's
that is
organization. And there's
politics. What is
it's
politics if not organization?
let's go back to whether or not horror films are
But
inherently
that's what we're
political.
talking
And
about.
I would like to, like I said, if we go with that definition, the argument there is no argument. You know, I
I
believe
that's
that
why
politics is
I want to work this from your definition.
so
I'm
let's
not
work it from
interested.
my
I don't want to
definition.
just say that I started this with an argument. It was my
Right.
argument that I wanted to make, and I think that I made it. But I want to make sure we're on equal footing.
I do believe that any art is like a Rorschach test. You know, it's like the idea of the cliche of the guy going into the museum and standing in front of a painting and saying, you know, what does it say to you? You know,
Yes.
and that's not necessarily a political statement. It can be, but it's not necessarily always. And your ability to take away from art what you want says more about you
Yes,
politically.
I agree. And
But
I think there's both, right? Like
mhm,
I love going to museums and not knowing a goddamn thing about what I'm looking at.
mhm,
I'll look at the paintings and I'll try to take my own meaning, and then they've got like the little placards or whatever that tell you the artistic intent sometimes.
mhm,
But I'm more interested in art for what my own interpretation of it is.
mhm.
Correct. But I think if you are going to serve up your right giant rubber monster movie,
Mhm.
right? What's one we want to talk? Smog Monster,
Well, yeah,
right?
we don't want to talk about the 1954 version of Godzilla because we all know now
No,
it's
no,
a,
no. I'm trying to find
but
one that's clearly not political in
Horror
its
on Party
messaging.
Beach, Horror on
Okay.
Party Beach from 1950 whatever, okay? Bunch of people in bikinis and bathing suits get attacked by a giant rubber monster and You know, these things were made basically to be background while kids were necking in the back of their parents' cars. That's how this stuff got made. It was
So
not, yeah.
first off, they are serving up by the fact that it is being published, for lack of a better term, right? Work that is being published. It's not for private consumption or to be passed around a friend group. It is for public consumption. It is saying something about how people act, and I think that is political.
I I think that is such a broad thing that's like saying, um, oh, it's like saying,
You've got girls
I
running
don't know.
around on bikinis,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
What year did this movie come out?
1950 something. Or
So
okay, so not bikini, okay, bathing suits, because I think bikinis happened in the late 50s, and yes, that caused a big storm. And I see how you could start tying, to me that's yes. So that's a spitting in the face of culture and norms at the time. I get that. That's not what I'm saying. The very fact that this film could be made with people running around in it would be seen as political in Iran,
well,
you know,
not in
sure.
1950,
No, not in 1950, but right
right?
now, if you brought that thing
And
out, it's still a goofy
and
monster
why would it
movie.
have been transgressive in Iran today and not transgressive in Iran in 1950?
Because of politics, but the politics and the culture that we weren't even that wasn't connected to the creation of the film. I think what I'd like to focus on in terms of whether or not horror is political
So
is
you don't,
in
okay, I'm just trying to figure this
yeah,
out as we're guiding the conversation. You don't want to have a
yeah.
conversation about politics being discussed within the internal creation of the movie. You want to talk about the people making the movie.
No, I'd like to talk about the art itself. I'd like to talk about the final product,
You
not
want to talk
necessarily
about
the
the
people
final product.
making it.
But to
Yes,
what
that's
degree
what
do
I
you want
want
to
to
talk
do.
about the final product?
Um, we could talk about our guesses about the intentions of the filmmakers. I mean, Horror Party Beach. That's not an American international film, but I know darn right well that Sam Arkoff and James Nicholson were not sitting there saying, you know what, we need something that's going to spit in the face of Eisenhower and the military-industrial complex.
No, but that's
Sam
not what I'm
Arkoff is
talking
to
about.
uh, uh, exactly, and I think what you're talking about is inherently flawed in this conversational context
Why?
because using your definition, all of it is political, and I
That
don't
is
believe that
where I
that's the case.
started the conversation by saying
Right,
that all of horror is political.
and I think that you are, and then my argument would be that no, I don't see a damn thing political about Horror Party Beach. I see lots of reflection of culture. I get that. I get it that it's a reflection of what people may be thinking, what they may be afraid of. It is not necessarily tied to politics. And the
But what is
political
your
definition,
definition of
your
yes?
definition of politics was everything, including the air we breathe, pretty much. And I don't
Yes.
disagree, and I don't agree. I believe politics
The
is
air we breathe
shape.
is political.
Then we may as well just stop here because I think
No,
that
I
this
because
is
I'm
you're saying
trying
it's
to
saying
define
everything is
this.
political. Here's my let me see if I can put this into words. My definition of politics is whether or not something you fundamentally believe in that makes your life better either benefits your neighbor or harms your neighbor. To me, that's simple. And there are people on the left who
Wait, flesh
believe
that out a little more. That definition out.
very simple. I believe,
So if it
uh,
harms people or it doesn't harm or it helps people, that's
yeah,
political.
yeah, pretty much. Because if you're going to use the argument about the five guys on the island,
Yes.
and you're saying that organizing is political, okay, let's attach to that a little bit. You know, um, uh, Harry Cooper wanting to go into the basement in Night of the Living Dead,
Yes.
okay,
Is making a decision that's
is
going to
making a
help or harm
decision.
people.
Yes, exactly. That is 1,000% political. I absolutely believe that. But that film writ large is a statement about those particular opinions of the people in that film, and it's one of the things that makes it brilliant. because these decisions that everybody's making is going to affect everybody in that room at one time. And are you selfish enough to want something at the cost of a neighbor, or are you willing to look beyond it and say, I want to have a culture, a life, an organization that is going to benefit everybody? And
Yes.
so when I hear politics, especially today, where someone like a Damien, who I explained, in my opinion, stepped into the quicksand the moment he opened his mouth, we are in a place now where it is hard to say anything without it being political. And to me, that's not the air we breathe. To me, that's a direct function of what's happened in the media for the last since it stopped being a since the news stopped being a cost center and became a profit center, and the
Hold on.
manipulation of opinion. Yeah.
There's a lot being said here. Okay, so
Okay.
just want to run some points real quick.
Hmm.
Um, the reason the statements that anybody makes on any given day publicly are because a lot of these can be harmful or helpful to people
Right.
through that definition of politics.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't necessarily think that it can be chalked up to uh, I think people are being more aware of the interconnectedness of all of these systems of political governance that do control things literally like the way we breathe, the air we breathe, right? And those are harmful or helpful decisions. And you might not be able to see them. You might not walk to your corner store, get your coffee, go to work, go through all these things, and realize that the political legislation uh, of 200 years influence your ability to do any of those things, including walk down a street or get your coffee or any of those things. And so I do think the reason that everybody is quote unquote making everything political is because we are more consciously aware that everything is political to some degree or another, especially with how we interact in a public forum.
In my opinion, I believe we've been made to think that.
Why or what makes you think that?
Um, I
Government
remember,
lobbies refuse to take action against corporations that are polluting and making our air unbreathable or making our
oh,
water
I'm not just, I'm
undrinkable
not,
or
that's not my point. My
yeah.
point is the idea of people taking sides, because there are people who are going to, we are in a place now
I'm
where
not on
people
any
will take,
side. I'm not
let,
politically affiliated with either
let me,
party
let me
or
finish. What you said about harmful drinking water and putting harmful stuff into, things that we consume, there are people out there who will say that that's good.
yes.
And there are people who will, uh, you know, that to me is politics. That to me
Yes.
is those people were brainwashed by some kind of communication that was put in their heads by some media thing that benefits financially from
Yes.
that. So, in my opinion, those ideas wouldn't be out there, and people wouldn't be having ridiculous fights where, um, if you said, going back to the sky, okay, well, the sky's blue. There are people out there who are going to say different. This is
Yes.
an
That is correct.
unprecedentedly weird time.
That is absolutely true.
So where I'm trying to go with is I am looking at the art itself.
Yes.
I am saying, and I'm saying when I say the art, I mean the individual pieces of art.
Do you think
Do
the
does
Toxic Avenger is political?
the first one was I didn't see the second one, but the first one, I mean, the idea of this guy becoming who he is because of toxic waste, which was a big thing in the 80s, and that was a political thing. Um, the idea of radioactivity, toxic waste being stuck in places that
Yes.
do affect people's drinking water. Yeah, that's political. I'm not saying the Toxic Avenger is not political. I mean, if you threw me 12 films, chances are I'm going to say they're all political. And then I'm going to come back to you with 12 films that I say are not political. But because of the freedoms we have as Americans, quote unquote, to make a film like that, as innocuous as it is, that is not inherently political in and of itself. It is the results of policy, which is where the word politics comes from, policy that allowed them to make it but it is not necessarily a subversive act. It just happens to be, it's like opening a door.
But I think the very creation of horror movies is a subversive act. That's what they are. You know, they're not
And
Matthew McConaughey rom-coms. They're not feel-good movies. They are designed specifically to provoke a reaction.
but maybe it's just a reaction that is horror at a situation that mirrors their everyday life. You know,
Yes,
with the fact
but
that
the
trauma is
fact,
now, it doesn't necessarily need to be political. Look at her. Okay, Hereditary.
yes,
Okay. Um, I guess if you are a practitioner of nature-related religions, you may find that political because it's attacking your lifestyle. But the truth is, to me, that's just a meditation on trauma. And I don't see anything political in that statement. I see a very important reach out to people who suffer trauma. I saw the TV Glow. I saw the TV Glow is 1000% a political statement.
it's
Every
a
single frame in that picture is a political statement
I don't think
because
I would argue that I don't think that is a political statement inherently. It is a statement on queer bodies and queerness and gender identity.
which is currently under attack, and it's made in an environment where that is under attack, and
Correct. And
therefore
I
that
don't
the
think it
very making
should
of that
be
film is.
political, but it is.
So there we go. So are you saying that if it was not a hot button issue right now, it wouldn't be political?
I think it wouldn't have been made.
I disagree. Underrepresented people, whether or not they were under attack, if they made that film
No, I'm
during
saying
the
I don't
Obama
know that a
administration, it
person I
still would
don't
have been. I
yes,
mean, and
I'm not
it's
saying
hard
it made
because
it any
not being queer, and I wanted to say this
yes.
very clearly that I saw the TV Glow. I understood what it was saying. It did not reach me the way it in my opinion has to reach people
Yes.
who it needs to reach,
Yes.
and thank goodness it does that. I think it's an incredibly um, useful piece of art, and it's going to be remembered decades from now as a brilliant statement
Yes.
and a thing that actually helped. People going to write letters. Write letters. People, dear Martha, I remember seeing. I saw the TV Glow. Uh, People are going to talk to the director and producer, 10, 15 years from now, going to say that movie saved my life.
Uh, I know people personally who could say that.
So there you go. So I do believe that. Uh, okay, here's a good question. I don't know how long it takes to get a movie made these days, but
Yes.
um, things were starting to heat up in that debate within the last 4 years. Well, okay, let's say 8. Okay, let's say that film had to have been made within this political environment. Whether or not, and even just in the last few weeks as of this recording, things have if you're looking at it on a graph, I mean, it just went into a hockey stick. Um, it was made in an environment where that lifestyle is anything from being frowned upon to an outright attack.
Yes. And
So
that
if you're
was
somebody, yeah. So
the
the
point.
making of that film is a political film. It has to have been made during this particular time in our history. Therefore, that person said, "I'm going to go out and I'm going to say something to the people who are being persecuted, who are being attacked, who are at least being looked down on or misunderstood, and I'm going to tell them that they're seen, and I'm going to tell them they're understood, and I'm going to show them ways how to do it, and I'm going to show
Yes.
them ways not to." Like with the main character, I don't want to spoil the ending, but
Yes.
the problem was not solved for one particular character,
Which
if
I
I read
think
it correctly.
wonderfully allows the audience to take on the pick up the baton for
Yeah,
that character
well, yeah,
to
agreed.
grow.
A
Yes.
1000%. And actually, that's one of the things I appreciated it, despite not being a queer person. I was like, wow, it didn't just tie it up nicely
Yes.
at the end. It was great.
Okay. So
So anyway, so yeah,
we'll shift a little because
okay.
this is a point where I think why art is inherently political. I'll give you two examples.
Hmm.
I made a feature film last year and I am currently uh in the very early stages of a second feature.
Oh, I see. This is all
It is
about the
now a third
plug.
feature.
I get it.
Yes, it's all about the plug. No, I'm not even going to drop the names. I'm not going to name drop. I'm not even going to drop my social media at Josh Graydon on Instagram. I last year there were a couple like named actors we wanted to work with who wanted to
Hmm.
work with us. Our film included sex scenes
Hmm.
and action scenes, didn't include these actors,
Hmm.
and due to political forces, because of where we're filming in New York, because of the
Hmm.
East Coast SAG, which I have no issues with. I understand why these are set up, but I'm just saying how they affected us personally.
The East
Uh,
Coast SAG, is that a thing that you saw on the actors during the sex
yes,
scene?
very
Okay.
funny. No, the
Because
the
I have
way
a
the
little of that.
SAG
Once you
structure,
get past to 60, I mean, it's all East Coast SAG.
the way the SAG contracts were structured with our budget, with our framework, we were not able to cast them, or we would have had to remove those scenes from our film.
Hmm.
And so that is what, so we weren't able to work with these actors. And that's one way politics externally changed and affected our movie. For another one we're working on, we
Hang
have to
on, back up.
decide,
What
yes,
politics? The SAG
the
politics?
politics of making movies, navigate negotiating budgets and negotiating with unions to be able to
All right,
they
I
that
can,
affected our. You're gonna
yeah.
argue unions aren't political?
No, well, that's the point. I was about to, and then I realized, no, that's a stupid statement. Um, it's,
And then the next movie we're
yeah,
filming,
okay, yeah,
we have to
okay.
take into
I don't
account
think I don't think I have a strong argument against that. Go on.
we have to take into account where we're filming because of tax credits and because
Hmm.
of the affordability of the locations that we have. And if we film it right where we live versus if we film it 2 states away in Maryland or in
Hmm.
Vermont, it is a great difference in what our budget looks like.
Hmm.
And that is going to affect what our film is. And those are political decisions that are absolutely going to affect every film that's made.
Okay, when I say okay, then let me. I think I'm getting a clearer idea of what we're talking about. I'm talking about the content of the picture and not the decision about what governs the making of the film. Let me see if I can stretch this out a little bit more because I believe that um, if you want to make a political statement in your film,
Yeah.
and if you are constrained by certain things, we talked about this on the Coffin Joe episode. Um, that the reason why that film got made is because he was making statements that were couched in metaphor
Yes.
during a time where Brazil was under a brutal dictatorship, which I think the film just came out this year, and I think it's nominated for Best International Film about what life was like under the
Really?
Brazilian dictatorship. Yeah.
I'll have to look into
Um,
that.
so uh, if so, the politics themselves, the laws that restrict the box that you're put in politically
Yes.
when you want to say something, okay? If you're creative, you can get around that. So to me, that's the political act we're talking about.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the fact that you can't cast somebody because the politics of SAG
Yes.
or
But
because
it
a
does
union
affect the
has
product.
rules. It may yeah, sure, it may, but what is the film still trying to say? And is a casting decision going to affect the art? Absolutely. I won't
Yes.
deny that. But depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say. In my opinion. And
And
with all the
then
films I've gotten made, clearly I'm an expert on the subject. But as a viewer, as a consumer of this stuff, if I'm absorbing the content, um, I want to either draw my own conclusion based on the Rorschach test, which is the film itself, if it's not going to come out and hit you in the face with a statement. Dawn of the Dead, again, it's like, oh, consumerism. Pretty much, it's almost like they turned to the camera and said, this film is about overconsumption. Um, if you look at a film like Hereditary, I don't look at that as a political film. I look at that as a meditation on a human condition, which is not in and of itself political, because no matter what kind of um, organizational system you're under, life is life, and your family situation, your income, what you do with that income, it's it's not always a political decision. It may be a function of politics that have created the rules in which you exist. But what you do with that is
But
political.
yet, the films themselves, I'm going to keep the conversation on horror films specifically.
Oh yeah, I know. That's right. I brought up Hereditary. That's not a horror film.
That is a horror film. That's one of my
Yes,
favorite
I know.
horror
I
films.
was
No.
my
I'm
God, I
saying
was a joke.
I didn't want
Jesus,
to step.
Josh, I'm trying to keep the humor in this thing for Christ's sake. Otherwise, people are gonna
I think this is an engaging conversation we're having.
Really? I'm falling asleep.
No, but you can't say so. A movie. You had a teenage daughter, roughly my age.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have seen a Twilight movie.
Yeah, sadly, I've seen them all. We had to watch them with the guy. Although I have told you, I liked the last 20 minutes of the last one. I thought that was
your daughter and I are roughly the same age. I love those
yes,
movies,
which is fine because they were made for you. They were not made for me.
yes. But regardless if you could watch that as a teen movie with no political statement. Well, if you look at even the littlest bit, Stephanie Myers is a Mormon.
Yes.
The arc of those stories and Bella's arc is very Mormon to their religious beliefs. And it is one of the few vampire stories with zero queer coding. That you can't even get a queer reading out of that. And that is absolutely politically motivated. And I think if you look at all stories of vampires, right? Like, fuck it. What? I'm trying to think of a dumb vampire movie.
Dumb vampire movie. Dracula Dead and Loving It. No, that's an out and out parody.
Okay.
And that doesn't count.
We'll call it.
Okay.
Dracula.
Okay.
Dracula was the author's statement on the queer sexuality that he was facing as a closeted man, saying goodbye to his queer lover.
That's what. Now, this I did not know until recently. To me, Dracula's political statement was xenophobic. It was about
sometimes it was like Nosferatu was xenophobic,
right?
And that is a political statement.
Yes, and I not disagree that Dracula is inherently a political film, and
you then can't build a vampire story that isn't political in nature.
I don't think I would disagree with that. So vampires themselves usually are okay. Let's take 30 Days of Night.
Yes.
Okay. How is it? Talk to me about the politics in 30 Days of Night.
It doesn't matter the politics in 30 Days of Night. The sheer fact that they are building off of the mythology of the vampire makes it political.
I think that's a spurious argument. I don't believe. I understand that the origin.
I've also haven't seen 30 Days of Night, so.
And neither have I. But it's I guess I should say I think I've said off screen that I have to get over a personal issue about the genesis of that film before I can sit and watch it. It's like why I can't watch Sharknado.
Sharknado.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, right. Is Sharknado a political? Sharknado is not really a horror film. Why are we even? It's.
I will consider that a horror film.
Okay. How political is that?
Again, it is built off of disaster films and the giant monster movie films that stemmed from real world political action.
I really think that's a huge, gigantic, about to break taffy stretch.
I don't think it is. And you make Godzilla.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Right. I'm not. We're
okay.
We are. I'm sorry. We're stipulating to Godzilla being a political film.
Mm-hmm.
You get 100 years. You get 100 years of giant movie monsters. All of them are stemming from the fears of the bomb.
There were giant monster movies made in the silent days. The Lost World, which was an Edgar Rice Burroughs story, which is basically about adventurers going into the jungle and finding out that dinosaurs still existed.
I wouldn't consider that a giant movie monster film. That's based on Lost World.
Despite the fact that it has giant monsters in it.
No, because we're talking about the post-war giant movie monsters, where it was
It's
radiation and man-made intervention, and
it,
not
but
based
not
on
but
Lost World.
but not every giant monster is one of those. I mean, there was a huge chunk of them because of Godzilla, and I don't think that the guys who were copying Godzilla were making statements. It was again guys who owned distributors saying, get me one of those giant Japanese monster movies, and then in the act of copying it, it's like, oh, Chemical X got spilled, on this iguana, and now it's 90 feet tall and eating people. Gorgo, the British version of Godzilla.
I have been looking at a poster of Gorgo on the set that I've been shooting
Uh, Okay,
every day,
see,
day in, day
the
out.
universe is telling you something, Josh. Gorgo is not a political film. Um, it's not saying anything to me about politics that I'm aware of, and
But
I've seen that film like
by
60 or
putting a
70
film
times.
out like that, you are making a political statement. Even if it is a
Gorgo,
cynical political statement of I am making this purely to line my pockets with green.
again, I'm saying that I'm not accepting as a criterion of this argument the very act of making the film, except
Why?
in very except in very specific situations. Like if you look at Pier Pasolini and Salo, okay, the making of that film was a political statement.
But you
The
can't pick and choose when it's a
Sure you
political.
can.
No, you
Sure you
can't.
can. The guy who made Gorgo, not exactly going out there and making a political statement or doing it because of um, uh, something about the political environment allowed the film to be made. It's not about that. I prefer that we keep the argument to the art itself, unless the art itself is made specifically as a subversive act. I do believe that Terrifier. Um, I do believe that Damien um, is in error by saying that the Terrifier franchise is not political, because his definition of political is what is right now the pop culture definition of political, which is red versus blue. And that's unfortunately, as I've said, a function of commercial news media, which is a whole nother conversation.
But I would
So,
argue that you can't say, right, if your definition of politics,
mhm,
right, is how things benefit for the positive or for the negative, your
right,
fellow neighbor, right?
right.
That's how you want to define politics in this conversation.
That's what politics is. It's like, how do I live? How do we define laws, rules, structures for us to exist as a society
So
that are going to be for the mutual
if
benefit?
I sit here and I say, how do I live for the mutual benefit of myself and my brother and my family? And the conclusion I come to is make a horror movie. That horror movie has no message that I'm putting forth. I
Uh,
have made a political act and statement by making the movie.
okay, so you have.
Right. And what I'm saying is anybody who sets out to venture to make a film, if we are stripping creative authorial intent
Hmm.
purely by saying, I am going to make this film for money, that is a political statement.
And this is, I think, the real core of our disagreement here, because I do not believe that is the case. I believe that um, horror as a political genre is either in the content itself, or if the act of making that art is to is in conflict with or despite um, pressures, rules, restrictions that have been put upon you.
Okay.
I believe that if the act of making a film is in and of itself an act of rebellion, then it is political. And that's where what started all of this during the last couple of days, which was Damien's statement. And prior to that, again, since David is a friend of the show, even though he doesn't return our phone calls anymore, it says what he says and upsets a certain wing of the culture. Um, here's an interesting thing. I run a streaming channel called The Monster Channel, which you can find if you go to themonsterchannel.com.
Who's
We had
plugging
a
what
situ-
now?
well, the reason for this is we just went through this, I think about 6 months ago, 7 months ago. On the Monster Channel, all of our content is hosted by your classic old school style horror hosts. You know, Count so and so, Baron so and so, Doctor so and so comes on, presents a film, does some skits, etc. We don't own these guys. We don't pay them. Um, some folks are identified uh, in their personal lives by their characters. Some people choose to separate between the two of them. During this past year, I got more involved in the channel after it's been run for a bunch of years, kind of on its own. I got involved in the channel from the marketing and business perspective, so I started paying a little bit more attention to things. And I noticed that a host who uses his host name went out and started making some um, aggressive political posts contrary to my political beliefs. So I went into the group chat, and this turned out to be an error because I went in and said, you know what? I am officially banning politics from the channel. And if you're going to go out, you're going to talk politics, do it under your real name. Don't do it as your host name because you're representing the channel. And best way to describe the reaction from everybody on both sides of the spectrum was like my face melted like the German guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just got my ass reamed by everybody because people believed, no, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and people know me as this character, and I got to do it. I forgot what point I was trying to make, except that um, I forgot what the hell point I was trying to make. Because it was just this was an important lesson for me that I had to the channel itself because myself and one or two of the other people who helped me run the channel we're also of different political spectrums, but we have agreed that the channel itself is going to be apolitical. It has to be because the people who make it and express. I mean, the guy who does the carpentry on Terrifier, okay, doesn't have a say in the script. Okay, he may be 100% MAGA, whereas on the channel, most of the people who make the channel what it is are on-camera personalities. And we have to understand that they're going to go out and say what they're going to say, and it doesn't represent the channel per se. Do we have them on the show? Yes, because on the channel, yes, because the show does not say what they're saying in public. I think this is where I was going. That I believe Damien erred by even bringing up the topic. And that film itself was a subversive act. And to your point, I think that his coming out and saying, "Oh, it wasn't political. It was, we were just trying to make a horror film." No, man. I mean, really, to be honest, on your marketing, on all the PR and stuff like that, it was all, "Ooh, kids, it's really awful." It was like when snuff films came out. It was like when the torture porn stuff came out. It's like you're not going to believe what people are allowing us to do. And even if you look at some of the acts in that film, um, again, it's a Rorschach test. You'll look at some of the killings in that film, and you're either going to say it's misogynist or it's feminist, depending upon how you look at it. I do believe that he tried to make content that was apolitical. This is the exact opposite of what I was talking about. I think the content was apolitical. I think the making of the film was political, and I think it was relatively. I'm not going to use the word ignorant because that sounds aggressive, but I believe it was. I will say it was tone deaf on Damien's part to say that it has nothing to do with politics. Because to your point, yeah, he's railing against a system in order to get a film made.
But I don't think you can have a movie where a woman gets sawed in half and say the contents are apolitical. Because
That act was shocking enough that the act itself contributed was part of the intent of shocking and therefore being a subversive bit of content.
But all horror acts to shock or be subversive to some degree or another. That's the existence of horror.
Not necessary. Shocking
In
somebody is
27
not
dresses, nobody's going to get cut in half.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Oh, never mind.
You forget I have a mother and a girlfriend.
Okay.
The existence of horror is political.
I can see the genesis of it being political. You talked about Mary Shelley.
Not
You talked
just
about
the
Bram
genesis
Stoker.
of it. You cut a bitch in half and it's political. You can't not puzzle pieces. You can't dismember a human being without making a political statement. You can't.
Guy gets the drill through his head in Lucio Fulci's City of the Living Dead. I'm trying to think really hard about how political that scene was.
But it's not about the scene itself.
It is about the
it's
scene
the
itself.
transgressive act of drilling somebody's head.
I'm not gonna agree, because the act of cutting a woman in half in Terrifier, especially where they started sawing her from.
Yes,
okay,
that
was absolutely, that was transgressive, and depending upon where you are on the spectrum, it was either misogynist or it was feminist. And when I say feminist, I mean that women of a certain level of confidence, level of are going to look at that scene and they're going to say, "Wow, that was really disgusting." Women who appreciate gore for gore's sake, whereas someone's going to say, "Well, he picked a woman because he's a misogynist," and maybe that's so. Again, I'm not saying he took a position one way or the other. Maybe
no, I don't want to presume.
Yeah, but it sure looks like it.
Wild guesses based off of things I know, but
yeah, I don't know anything about.
I'm not interested in getting slapped with libel or slander.
Right, I don't know anything about the production team behind Terrifier. Nothing about them. We only know Dave. I know. Fine. Well, again, we'll keep that.
Yes.
We know Steve Barton, who's also on the same show as Dave, who was there. He got Terrifier 1 noticed. He helped produce Terrifier 2. And again, I'm not going to get involved in libel, but it is a mysterious thing that he's no longer involved after Terrifier 2. Mm-hmm. And we will let the audience draw conclusions or read Steve's book, currently available on Amazon, A Comedy of Tragedies.
We should actually put that in the show notes.
There you go.
Unless you might find this conversation offensive.
It's
plugging his book.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're selling his book. You know what I mean? That's a political act. No, it's Steve Barton, Uncle Creepy, former guy who ran the Fangoria forums. Yes. He created Dread Central, produces movies, one of George Romero's great confidants, friend of the show. Steve wrote a book called A Comedy of Tragedies, which is a memoir. And I haven't read it yet. Sorry, Steve. But I'm absolutely sure that he at least covers the Terrifier part of his life. So you could look in there to see what's going on. But going into Terrifier, not knowing anything about it, aside from meeting Dave and knowing what Dave's politics are, I don't know anything about the makers of the film. I do, except I do know one person who is at the toppy top somewhere, because I'm also Facebook friends with him, is on the opposite end of the political spectrum. One has to imagine that they didn't sit around at the end of the shooting day and open up the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and start, debating. So it was the film itself making a political statement by sawing that woman in half, starting from her private parts. I think
absolutely.
And what political statement was that?
I don't know. I'm not to say about that. But it is a statement. It is a political act.
Okay.
You can't.
I won't disagree with that because that scene itself probably pushed it over the edge
For a
of
lot of people, yeah.
being able to get rated. And the idea of not being rated itself was the political act. I totally get that. It's
And
like, well,
all,
we can put in something that's going to be so offensive that there's no way we could get this film rated.
yes, that's
And
political.
yeah, I did not say that that's not the case. Is he take? But
But I
given
think
what
any
they
horror movie, because they inherently deal with transgressive people, with transgressive subject matter, with transgressive um, themes, every horror movie by its existence is political because it's not your Ryan Reynolds rom-com. It's not
Mhm.
uh some other like a John Woo action film.
Again,
Which we could have different discussions about art
sure,
as a whole being political, but
and
I
that's
think
where I
horror
think we're
is
going to want.
inherently political.
I think this is where I'm afraid we wind up getting into a circular argument
Yeah.
here because again, some of the criteria you're using to make that statement is different than the criteria that I see.
But again,
And
by what
the core
criteria
of
am I using it that you don't agree with?
because you believe that art itself is inherently
Where
political.
I
I
say I'm putting that aside. I'm
Oh,
saying
okay.
by
I
the
must have missed that part.
no, that's my point was I'm not making a statement about art being political inherently,
Hmm.
which I could, but that's not what we're here to do.
Right.
I am
You're saying
saying
horror is,
horror by its sheer existence.
and to me, okay, like we said before, I said we've got a couple of floors here to get
Yes.
to, and to me, the floor is the content.
Yes.
And so art is political. We decided that that's too broad. Um, Horror as a genre is inherent in itself
Yes.
political. I again do not agree because just the sheer act of shocking somebody, it depends on what you're shocking them with.
I don't think it does. I think the fact that you are going to sit and you're going to make a movie designed to even a movie designed to entertain, I would
Mhm.
argue is political, but that's not the argument I'm going to make here.
Because you're trying to elicit emotions out
You
of the
because
person
you
who's
are
watching it.
dealing
But
specifically with horror,
mhm.
which is the underbelly of society. It is.
It's
If it wasn't
it
political,
traditionally
the
has
same
been
way
it. Yeah.
pornography is inherently political. If it
Hmm.
wasn't political, there wouldn't be bans on horrors. There wouldn't be nobody's banning. They're banning 28 Days Later. They're not banning 28 Days.
Uh, ooh, that's a good one. Um, I see your point there. However, uh, horror as a genre is too broad to say that um, they don't ban monster movies. Okay, that's an unformed statement. Um, the
Because
monster movies
I
of
was
the
gonna say I've got a
40s.
list. I've got a
No,
list that I
no,
could
it's
pull up.
sorry that was old man speaking. The monster movies of the 40s and 50s, which may have scared people when they were younger, and not for political reasons. You look at the mummy movies of the 40s from Universal. I bring this up 1,000 times. Um, Not a single political thing about them.
About the
Um,
Mummy.
about the mummy movies, the 1940s
I
ones, where
never saw
Lon
them in the
Chaney's.
1940s.
Okay, well, if you've seen like the last four Jason movies put out by New Line, you've basically seen those mummy movies. Big lumbering guy goes out and kills a bunch of people.
Wait, what people?
All right, well, in the Jason films, it's the
No, no,
campers.
no.
Oh,
I've
okay,
seen
you're
all the
making
Jason movies. I'm asking about the
yeah.
Mummy movies. I'm asking who the Mummy's killing.
People related to that anything to do with no, that's not true. Um, it just becomes anybody who gets in the mummy's way of trying to kill a certain family that was responsible for um, bringing him back, bringing Princess Ananka back from the dead.
There's no political statement there?
I see what you're saying because I'm rolling it through my head. I'm like, okay, if you dig all the way down to what the family did, the family were basically white English people who went over to Egypt and desecrated a grave, which at the time in the 40s was not really a political thing because it was done through the lens of
Why wasn't it a political thing
colonialism
in 1940s?
because because it was um,
Who wasn't it a political thing to?
it wasn't a political thing to the colonial lens that created it.
I'm
I'm
sure there were a
seeing where
lot
you,
of Egyptians
I
in
got you.
1930 that were having issues
I
with
just
it.
said, I just said. Okay, I was coming to the same conclusion.
I know. I'm trying to dig this because if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But
Good
I'm trying
dig,
to.
get it, mummy dig.
I will watch it tonight. I have all of them on. I got a big box collection of all the Universal monster movies that I've been making my way
I
through.
would say if you just dropped into the last one, which was the Mummy's Curse,
Hmm.
and knew nothing about the families, because by that time the families were all killed, and it wasn't even anybody related to them. It was just Princess Ananka was carried into a swamp in the film before, and then came out of the swamp in at the beginning of the last one, and then um, amnesia took on the form of a human woman, and the mummy just goes to try to find her. That's all, because they were in love thousands and thousands of years ago. So the colonial aspect wasn't there. Um, the Egyptian aspect wasn't there, except as a flavor.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I would say that you pull that film out, and that is pretty much cleansed of anything that even was remotely um, related to colonial excavation of graves that didn't belong to them.
But it's still based on. I mean, it's even within the framework of the franchise.
Hmm.
A descendant of political statements and acts and
I'm not again. This is the I'm talking about individual pieces of content. The artists who endeavor to put out a particular film. What are their
yes,
intentions?
they're making money based off of a franchise.
They may be completely oblivious to what happened in the very first film. So I don't. I believe that their
You
intention.
can't say that they were oblivious to what happened in The Mummy if they're writing the fourth one.
I'm 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 trying to hang my hat on something, but I'm saying that it's very possible that people involved in one particular entry of a film of a series may very well not have known anything about or the screenwriters. I wish Tom Weaver was here. Tom Weaver could help me talk about who exactly the screenwriters were, whether or not they were part of the Universal ecosystem at the time, or if they were just stringers who were brought in. It's been a long time since I've looked at who the hell was behind the scenes of these films, but back then it didn't seem to be on their minds. Whose minds was it on? It was on the minds of the people who made the Black Cat. It was on the minds of the people who made Dracula. It was on the minds of the people who made Frankenstein. We all know Bride of Frankenstein. You
One of my
know,
favorite movies
that's
ever made.
right. I mean, and that was made by queer people.
Yes,
So,
all,
yeah,
across the
100%.
board.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Okay. The Wolfman's a political film. And I think that that's an unconsciously political film because it's about an American who goes back to Europe and becomes violent due to a curse in his family, which is a statement about what happened to Americans in World War II,
But you
dragged back
don't
to the
think
country.
that's a political movie then,
I did say that I think that's a political movie.
even though you
I
don't think
said
that
it.
was the intention.
No, I think that, and this is where I get to politics versus culture, because the argument I was going to make is I think that unintentional politics come out of films that are a mirror of the culture. So the Wolfman, uh, so films that speak to the psyche and the zeitgeist, um, because a story happens to resonate with people, like the Wolfman. I don't believe that the Wolfman, the political statement of the Wolfman, I wasn't even aware of until Dave Scal, God rest his soul, wrote the book The Monster Show and
Yeah, great
and
writer.
pointed out all this stuff.
Yeah.
The Wolfman happened to take place in the 40s, so it may be something that was in the subconscious of everybody who's making it, but no one went out there and said, "We're going to make a metaphor about." America's involvement in World War II. I think the Wolfman came out in 41. So at that point, World War II was, something that was making everybody nervous that was taking place overseas. So, but at the end of the day, it's a simple story about a guy who goes back to ancestral home and is revisited by trauma in his family. So that's not, in my opinion, a political statement. It's a reflection of culture. It's a reflection of common
But what culture
neuroses
in the
we have.
1940s?
What do you mean?
What culture in the 1940s?
Well, the target was the American audience.
Right. What culture in the 1940s wasn't directly influenced by political action?
I'm saying that. I'm saying that was not their intention to make a metaphor. I'm saying that they may have been in the neuroses, the subconscious of people. And I believe politics is conscious. I think that's probably, it took us an hour and a half to get here, but I think that's probably the core of my argument is that I believe that politics is conscious and that the reaction, um, what may come out in the film is subconscious that may resonate with the consciousness of the audience, which is why people can look at a horror film or any kind of art and see two different things if the artist is not specifically trying to hit you over the head with a message. So yeah, politics is a conscious act.
It is, but I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
And then going back to the other argument, which is the making of the film itself inherently a political act? I say no. I'm again focusing on the content. And if the content itself is not consciously political, but it has political resonance with people, it is because it is touching on the neuroses that are subconscious in the zeitgeist. And I'll tell you, so let's talk about things like the torture porn films of the 2000s.
My favorite genre and era.
Okay, so here's my look at it as somebody who was in his 40s at the time.
Mm-hmm.
To
I
me,
think I was 3 when the first Saw movie came out.
okay, go fuck yourself. It's to me, after 9/11, there was a collective numbness
Yes.
that I had felt anyway. And I just moved back to New York. I grew up as a New Yorker. I lived in Los Angeles when all this happened. Came back to New York very shortly after 9/11. And I remember something I was referring to as disaster fatigue. After 9/11, there were reports, okay, there was this near miss or this bomb, got stopped. And so every week it was this constant, all this stuff hitting you at the same time. And eventually it felt like there was, like people were used to this shit happening all the time. And it took a lot to wake people up. I remember being on Fifth Avenue one day, and when they do work on the streets and they have a hole in the street and they have a giant steel slab that they put over it.
Yeah.
Well, it slipped out of construction workers' hands or something, and the thing hit on the street with a bang. And that kind of stuff would never have bothered a New Yorker. I saw Fifth Avenue freeze like it was a still that the credits ran over in a 70s movie.
Yes.
And that freaked me out because that meant that it was still on people's minds, even though they weren't being upfront about it. So what does this have to do with torture porn films? I looked at torture porn and their popularity as like that song, I Hurt Myself Today to See If I Still Feel.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that
Trent Reznor, one of my favorite artists.
Right. I believe that people were so numb to messaging out there that they would go see these films to see whether or not how much it would take to elicit a reaction out of somebody. And the films just kept getting more and more and more and more extreme. So
I
that's
also
one way
think
of looking at it. Go ahead. I think you're probably going to say the other side.
One other way I think of it, I think films are, this has been said many times, are the closest thing to dreaming that we experience consciously. And one of the theories that I accept as truth for dreams are a way for our brain to basically clean itself and make sense of every
Mhm.
piece of information that it's fed. And I think in a lot of ways it was a social dream state where we were making sense of the images we were seeing coming out of
Mhm.
Iraq and
Agreed.
the way we were torturing people across the
That's one way
planet.
of looking at it.
And you
Yep.
were seeing all these imagery, and you see the exact same imagery. A lot of torture porn also stemmed from the French New Extremity,
Yes.
which had nothing to do with American politics and was entirely based in French politics
Right.
at
Right.
the time. But it was still influencing what was happening here in America.
Mhm. So we've just talked about the two sides
Yes.
that you see when you're looking at that. And I think it depends on where you were, and not necessarily on a political spectrum, but on an awareness level. I do not have a problem saying that at the time, um, 9/11 upset me so much that the idea of torturing the bad guys
Yeah.
was something I supported.
Hmm.
I was 100% behind it. I'm like, get those motherfuckers, you
Yeah.
know? Uh, yeah, waterboard the fuck out of them. Let's get these secrets. Let's find out where these people are living and stuff. Um, I obviously don't think that way now. Um, we've discussed my xenophobia on the show
Hmm.
as I was growing up. Um, we've discussed that a lot of that had to do with time and place. For me, my politics about that informed my reaction to 9/11 came out of the 1979 taking of the hostages in Iran. You know,
Hmm.
I was 16, I was a boy. It was in the middle of the Carter administration. That, when you're a boy, you're looking at the Carter administration and saying, "Are we becoming weak?" Yada 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 yada. So that thread stayed with me till 9/11, and 9/11 was like hitting the xenophobic G spot
Hmm.
for me. So for about, I think, a good 5, 6 years, I mean, my head just went, yeah, torture them all. So that's why when I would look at torture porn, I would be watching it because I wanted to feel something.
Hmm.
I didn't realize it was because I was going along with the numbing, and I was going along with I am numbing myself the way somebody who lived next to Auschwitz would numb themselves. I'm allowing the stuff to happen. And was I subconsciously looking at these films because there was something in the back of my head that was saying, that's not the right way to think? How numb are you? How much of a
Hmm.
monster are you that you have to sit there and watch, an Asian girl in a hostile film get her eye ripped out? And I was a gore hound when I was growing up, but to me, it was always a magic trick. It was, wow, how'd
Hmm.
they do that? In the torture porn films, it is, look at what we're doing, look at who's doing it, why they're doing it. There was a mean spiritedness about those films, or at least that's what I see now. That as an audience member, I feel I was complicit in
Hmm.
it. It's like, let me see more, you know? Requiem for a Dream, ass to ass, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, show me something I haven't seen before. I don't care who you're doing it to or why you're doing it.
Hmm.
Whereas somebody like you looks at that film, and a lot of other people did, and used it to process, wow, we are doing this kind of shit, you know, and it's wrong.
And not
And
all, growing up with unfettered internet access. I mean, my parents are pretty
uh,
good, but
that's a
still,
good point. Yeah, you're
you would
right. Those were the
see
days.
the uncut videos that you could
Yeah,
find of
you're
some of
right.
this stuff.
And you know what? I sought that stuff out too.
Because you know what's crazy? I remember watching Hostel
Hmm.
and being like, this is pretty tame compared to the real shit that I had seen.
Yeah.
And that was the moment I was scared. That's when I was like, fuck, I gotta dial this back.
Yep.
I gotta actually process this.
I totally agree.
But I think
It's
that's my ultimate point, right? Is
mhm,
is that right? Because we're all sitting here from the comfort of our homes viewing it,
mhm.
right? Whether it's real tapes or if it's fictional films. But horror can only be viewed as entertainment when you have socially and politically been given the benefit and the freedom to be able to view that violence and transgression as solely entertainment, right? I can't watch those horror movies without also thinking of the fact that someone somewhere in the world is living that and
Hmm.
experiencing that. And I think that was cemented for me. I am incapable of watching a horror movie without thinking of that, because when I watched, and this is a personal story, I'll let the editor know if they think that I can even tell this story. But
Hmm.
I had helped a family friend through a incredibly dark um, a domestic abuse situation.
Hmm.
I mean, whatever you're thinking, 1,000 times worse.
Hmm.
And being very hands on and seeing this the sort of aftermath of things up close and first person.
Hmm.
Um, and helping this family friend through this situation. And I was glad to do it because I wanted to do the right thing in that situation. My dad and brother and I decided, like we process a lot of things, we were going to go out and we were going to go see a movie. And we were just like, let's get away from it. We're going to go see a movie. We go to the movie theaters. What's playing? Lee Whannell's Invisible Man.
Hmm.
And I watched that movie, and I on the get to the parking lot afterwards, and I break down and cry.
Yep.
Not because I had processed what had been done, because I related to what, but because I said, wow, she went through an incredibly fucked up situation, and it wasn't a quarter of what this family friend had gone through.
Right.
And that was where it was, where I said, wow, this fucked up horror movie that everybody else is going to be. And I think, I don't know, maybe it is just me. Maybe I can't make a complete argument about it. But I think the ability to say that horror is just entertainment and not political comes from I've been avoiding this word because it is loaded, but it seems to be the only word I can use. It does come from a place of privilege, I think.
And I'm not going to deny that because um, I did say earlier, I've done well with capitalism. Of course, I say that
Yes.
I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. Um,
Sounds
and
like the average
after
capitalist.
yeah, and after I get off this phone, I have to go to the sperm bank to get my $1.50. Um, it's a joke. I have a vasectomy. Uh, so uh, yeah, maybe it does come from a place of privilege. I'm not going to deny it. My wife and I, during the last year, yes, last year was a very transformative year. We went through a bunch of things and had a bunch of experiences where at the end of it, we realized just how privileged we are.
Mhm.
Um, there's been a lot of illness in the family, there's been a lot of sickness in the family. There have been some surprises, and we're getting to the age where people around us are starting to contract stuff or die.
Yeah.
And and we're lucky enough to have two amazing children who are going out there and contributing positively to society.
Yes.
Um, we realize that we have a privilege, but it is also a responsibility.
Mhm.
So it is changing our views on a lot of things, changing my views. Sandra has, God bless her, Sandra has always been the, you know, uh, yeah, I've gone through a lot of evolution in the last like 10, I would say within the last five. Um, it's been accelerating, obviously, as time goes on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I look at a lot of things now and I think to myself, am I looking at this because um, I'm lucky enough not to have to look at it because I fear it's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
um, if you ever take the 7 train from Flushing to Main Street, you pass a building. I'm not quite sure if it's a church or whatever. I've never had a chance to look on the other side of it, but um, as you pass it on the train, you look out the window. They have a large Bible quote on it, and it says, "Is it nothing to you, all those who pass?"
Mm,
And that's always stuck with me.
yeah.
I think to myself about the German citizens who were marched through the camps by the Allies after World War II.
Mm,
Um, how many of them were shocked, and how many of them just kind of knew and didn't admit to themselves. I do ask myself at various times, with our privilege, um, and I'm not saying this in any way to pick a side,
hmm
and that's a loaded phrase because the phrase "pick a side" now itself is problematic. Um, what's it like being a good German?
mm.
Um, there's a scene in Cabaret
I just watched
where
this last night.
so the sequence where the young boy comes up and starts singing "Tomorrow Belongs to
I
You,"
had
and they cut back
forgotten
to the
about it, and it
audiences.
chills me.
There's a scene. There's one of the shots is of this very old German guy who just
Mm,
has this look of resignation on his face.
hmm
Oh shit, here we go again, and
Yeah.
I'm at a place in my life where there's nothing I can do.
hmm
I have never identified with that fellow more than I have in the last 10 years. And I'm saying that to encompass several administrations and several turns in our history.
hmm
And it's a difficult place to be.
hmm
So, where were we going with this? We were talking about the idea of looking at torture porn and what was your takeaway from it?
Yeah.
Um, I didn't think of it at the time as, oh shit, are we monsters and doing this kind of stuff to other people? I was
Mm,
like, bring on more, man. I'm not feeling it,
mm.
you know? Um,
Well, Joe, this seems like a great place to sort of wind it down if you want
yeah, I'm
to.
sorry. I'm
We've
putting,
been
yeah,
talking. No,
I'm starting to get into that sitting in the corner with the pipe, meditating out loud
well,
uh,
Joe,
kind of
you
place. So
are
you're right.
among probably my 10 to 5 favorite people to talk to.
Oh,
You
wow.
are more self-reflective than anybody I know. You are constantly inspiring me. When you suggested this conversation, Joe, stop counting your
Here's,
money.
here's a little something for you there, John.
I'll take it. Because I'm not doing as well at capitalism. Um,
It's all right. I'm holding on to this the way George Bailey did those $2 in the safe.
but
So, yeah.
I was so excited to have this conversation with you, and we should have more of these. We've talked about doing this for a minute, and I don't see a reason why we shouldn't keep doing spur of the moment conversations like this, you and I, for the channel.
I'm glad the
Um,
situation of the last couple of days
yes,
kind of pushed us to do this because
yes.
I will say, as I have been involved in the horror business
hmm
since the late 1980s, I have always seen horror as a useful therapy for culture.
Yes, yes, I agree.
And one of the reasons why we started the podcast was to have four generations covering almost the majority of horror filmmaking history.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
It's been around for 100 years. And one thing we haven't even talked about is and this is not a plug, but I've been working on a book for the past
I
year,
didn't know that.
which is yeah, because I've learned stop talking about the stuff you want to do and actually do something because if I
I
had time
agree.
for every project I've talked about and didn't do, but um, the most consequent, in my opinion, the most consequential continent in the last 100 years has been Europe
Mm,
because and it just so happens that film mass communications that could be distributed are about 100 plus years old. So horror films, which have been around since the birth of film, examining the history of Europe in the last 100 years through the eyes of the horror films that were made at the time.
yeah.
I think that the purpose of that book was to say just how important horror is as a cultural therapy.
Yes.
They've done this stuff examining American history and all that, but nobody has looked at Europe because Europe has, in the last 100 years, touched every inch of soil on the planet.
hmm
So whatever was going through the European mind over 100 years is important for people to study. And you're not going to sit through a dry European history book, but you're going to read about the horror films.
Yeah.
So that's what that's what my ramble is about, is that horror as a cultural mirror, as a form of therapy, is critical.
Yes.
And the idea of having this conversation with you, where even though I consider myself a relatively progressive guy, you are way more progressive.
I would like to think I'm about as far left as a person could be, and if somebody can show me somebody more far left, I'm willing to learn.
Well, it's a good workout for my brain. I'm not sure if I'm going to change my mind on a lot of things, but it is going to open my mind.
Yes.
So yes, so right back at you, Josh. You are one of the, your parents, I've said before, your parents have done a great job.
Thank you.
And having these conversations with you, I will deliberately take the role of contrarian because I think it's important for arguments to be airtight. I will say, so if we wanted to talk about who wins here, I will say that chances are you may win by a technical knockout.
I would say the audience wins for having heard this conversation.
Yeah, if you made it to the end of this thing, you've won. Yes.
And Joe,
indeed.
to your other point, I'd like to say I got a text from my mom about an hour ago while we were having this conversation saying you are definitely my son. So if anybody knows my mother and heard this rant, I'm now reflecting that I probably have learned quite a bit from her.
But these kind of debates, I really do wish we had somebody on the other side of the political spectrum who we could talk to in a measured fashion about this. I would love to hear what they have to say because, like I said, having this kind of dialogue is mental calisthenics. And it's important, and I don't think a lot of people do it. And I'm hoping that people walk away from this particular episode not so much a reinforcement of their own ideas, but have a chance to think about what does horror do for them? What do they get? What pleasure do they get out of horror, and why?
Yes.
And especially in light of today's political environment. I feel bad for Damien Leone. I'm sorry. I don't know anything about him as a person. I feel bad because he stepped into quicksand. And,
I'm intentionally not saying any political,
which is fine.
Anything about him specifically.
Which is fine.
I've said more than enough on my social media.
And I say this also loving Dave.
Yes.
And
I will gladly love Dave. One lesson I definitely learned from my mother: if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Which is fine.
So
we get it.
I will sing Dave's praises to the ends of the earth, and I will say nothing about Damien Leone.
Okay, fine, and we get it. But anyway, I think it was great that we got a chance to do this.
Yes.
I thank you for accepting the offer and forcing me to do this, right away. I wasn't really prepared. And I hope that at the end of this, some of my rambles come out coherent, man, because this felt very stream of consciousness.
I think it definitely was. Okay, let's wrap up the show but stay on. I'll stop the recording.
So then do we do slash or smash? Wow, you laughed so hard you knocked your audio out. Jesus.
It was that has been a very weird episode of Stabby Road. If you enjoyed this, we might do more. Who knows? I love talking with you, Joe, and even if we don't do another, we definitely should at least gather socially to talk more.
No, I agree.
I missed you.
Yeah, and I missed you too, and I missed the team, and I miss your dad, and and my God, Sonia, who is one of the greatest souls I have had the pleasure of meeting. Working with the four of us, working with the four of us, has definitely opened my mind, and I feel privileged to be working with all you guys. I'm going back into the iron lung after this is over.
So from all of us at Stabby Road, thank you for taking a walk down Stabby Road with us, and we will see you very shortly.
The Stabby Road podcast is a production of Fourth Castle Micromedia. Copyright 2023. Production facilities provided by Eric Todd Photography, LLC.
See you next week.